My name is Bridget Empire. 1 year ago, I was a paleontologist working on mouse anatomy, until I was bitten by a radioactive newspaper columnist. Now, I'm the Daily Telegraph's one and only science and culture correspondent. Turns out that undiagnosed ADHD was the reason I couldn't hold down a real job, and that living in a country that wanted me dead and wouldn't pay me enough to afford extortionate rents was making my life miserable. Now I'm poor and I live abroad. I may not speak the language here, but I'm still reporting from my haunted British newspaper, and I'm still here to talk about... what was it this time? SpiderMan. Oh, fuck yeah! Except, I swear sometimes comic book fans make J. Jonah Jameson seem well-adjusted. Let me explain what I mean. At the turn of the 21st century, Marvel Comics was basically broke. The collector's boom turned out to be a collector's bubble and popped spectacularly. No comic was ever going to be the kind of money printer X-Men Volume 2 number 1 was, at least not in the foreseeable future, and the company needed money fast if they wanted to stay afloat. This is the time period where Marvel sold off the film rights to all of its most famous franchises to a bunch of different studios. Movie rights were a lot of money in their pockets when they needed it the most. On the comics side, they tried a bunch of things that they wouldn't have risked in the previous few decades. They hired some rising indie stars with backgrounds in other genres to take a stab at breathing fresh life into their old characters. They experimented with different publishing initiatives. They needed something to make a name for themselves again. Eventually, a few of these gambles did pay off. Some of them might have stuck them in an awkward situation with multiple movie studios warring with each other, including their own one, but for now, we don't think about that. For now, think about Brian Michael Bendis, fresh from the indie comic book scene, teaming up with prolific Spider-Man artist Mark Bagley to make Ultimate Spider-Man number 1, which would become a fan and critical darling. Ultimate Spider-Man was a reboot of Spider-Man for the modern day, set in a new universe with none of the baggage that comes with several decades of continuity. This would be a whole generation's jumping on point to one of the greatest characters in all of comic book history. It was my jumping on point, in fact. I picked up Ultimate Spider-Man starting with the third arc, because it was the first issue I saw in shops ever, although I promptly picked up all the previous issues. We didn't really get comic books in stores in the UK, but one day I walked into our local newsagents with my parents, where I'd usually beg for a chocolate bar or an ice cream, and I saw the cover immediately when I walked in. A beautiful Mark Bagley portrait of Spider-Man defeated, being pinned against the wall by the unmistakable metal arms of Dr. Otto Octavius. I was instantly hooked. And though I stopped reading a few times over the years, I always picked back up where I left off a few years later, and I carried on. I love Ultimate Spider-Man, and genuinely think it's one of the best stories ever told in comic books. And one of the things that made it so great was that the story of Peter Parker definitively and heroically ended. Not just that. It had a beginning, a middle, and an end. You saw his character grow and change throughout this period as a great coming-of-age tale, and then Peter died in a beautiful send-off, fitting for his character, and one that I genuinely loved despite my attachment to this character, I'd grown up with this guy. But it was earned, and it was beautiful, and what came in its place was equally magical. A new Spider-Man arose in its place. Inspired by Peter's noble sacrifice, and driven and interesting in his own right, Miles Morales captured my heart, and the hearts of a lot of people. And at the same time, a certain subset of the fandom had a reaction you probably are all quite familiar with now that Miles has become much more of a cultural staple. Namely, they acted like a child who just had his favourite toy taken away. I tend to suspect a lot of the people raging at this hadn't actually ever read these comics because of how they argued, but some of them certainly did. And as time went on, and as Marvel made more legacy heroes, they got louder and stupider. And the community became a much more hostile place for minorities to hang out as a result. People arguing that Spider-Man had been replaced, clearly not knowing that Miles lived in a different universe, were obviously not fans. Neither were those who cried about Thor turning into a girl, or Iron Man being a girl now, or any of this stuff. And anyone who actually read these comics knew that they were full of shit. But they were loud enough that I wasn't surprised to learn they made a lot of non-white fans feel very unwelcome in the community. And to that I can only say, did you guys learn nothing from Spider-Man? He could be anyone under the mask. That's part of the whole point, as Stan Lee explicitly said.
Captain America, you still have this much of his face. Spider-Man's completely enveloped in his costume.
Oh, you know the good thing about that?
Yes.
You could be any kid.
Yeah.
You could be black, you could be Asian, you
Right.
could be Indian, you
Right.
could be anything, and imagine you were in that costume.
Right.
So I think that made it relevant to everybody everywhere.
Right.
And that was accidental. I mean,
Right.
I don't think we planned it that way, but
Right.
it was very fortuitous.
And that's like why Jonah Jameson distrusts him in the first place. Because he's a man hiding behind a mask, he can't tell who he is. He won't show his face in public.
Well, this is certainly more than I expected. I'm finally gonna see who you really are.
More importantly, Spider-Man is about fighting for the little guy, about using the power you have in society, however much it is, to help people, to lift them up, to make everyone as safe and happy as possible, even if you have very little to your name yourself. How does frothing at the mouth about a non-white Spider-Man demonstrate any of that? Oh, who am I to be talking about this? Well, I could be anyone under this mask, but for now, you'll have to believe that I am Bridget Empire, science and culture correspondent for the Daily Telegraph, the only newspaper in Britain that didn't get anyone to review Across the Spider-Verse, because I insisted that we not introduce Dan to the concept of the multiverse, lest his evil undead energies infiltrate infinite worlds and cause an incursion that leads to the end of all things. Instead, I'm going to be here explaining why, in my correct opinion, Miles Morales actually holds the key to saving the entire Spider-Man franchise. And oh boy, if you've been reading Spider-Man comics since how long was it? 20 years now? Jesus Christ. You know it needs saving. So, let me explain what I mean by that. What's the current state of Spider-Man? What does Miles Morales represent that's different? And how could he bring the heart back to one of the greatest comic book stories of all time? Right, look at this comic book collection. This behind me, this 2 shelves is all comics. That bottom half, this bottom right half, that's all Ultimate Spider-Man, like from left to right. So trust me, this is the cabinet of a nerd. I know what I'm talking about here. So, have you guys heard of Peter Parker? No, not that one. Not that one. Not that one either. Yeah, that one. Okay, good. We're on the same page. Well, Peter Parker used to be married to Mary Jane Watson, and he was moving on with his life. The drama wasn't gone from his life. He still had a lot of good stories going, but he was no longer the single guy from the 1960s that he was for like 5 minutes, and for some reason, that was a problem. Marvel Editorial has this problem where the kids who grew up in a certain era eventually get the creative reins of the company and insist on making things the way that they remembered them growing up. I talked about this a little bit in my X-Men video, with the way they've gone back and forth on making Magneto a villain, then a hero, then a villain again. The thing is, with Peter Parker, when they wanted to make this change, and he was in a relationship, they could just have him and MJ break up. Once he was married, their image of a young, swinging, single guy, which I must stress was an extremely short period of time in the Spider-Man canon, would be shaken, in their view. I'm not saying this myself, don't judge me, but they thought it would be shaken by him being divorced. Like, a divorcee seems old to them. Not to me. People divorced people can be young. I'm older than some divorced people I know. But, unable to take the idea that Spider-Man was a happily married man, Marvel Editorial would rather assassinate Peter Parker's character completely than have him be divorced. This happened in an infamous arc known as One More Day, where Peter made a deal with Mephisto, the Marvel Universe's literal devil, to save his dying Aunt May's life. She's old, and she's been dying pretty much since the 1960s, in return for his marriage, which we all know that's what devils want. Devils want your marriage to be over, but you're still around. There's no real sacrifice, just the happiness of your reading base. It's worse than how I'm explaining it, actually. This might sound bad, but I'm actually shocked at how little it hurt me to write this, despite how much that dumpster fire hurts to read. If you watch the back issues video on One More Day from Comic Pop in full to get it explained to you, you'll know what I mean. Don't read it yourself, it's not worth it.
Today we're going to do Spider-Man One More Day. This is the worst Spider-Man story ever written. It's the worst Spider-Man story ever written.
Is it the worst story ever written, or the worst Spider-Man story ever written?
The worst Spider-Man story.
Okay.
I'm not going to be a jackass and be like, it ruined everything. Not just Spider-Man, but everything. Like, how bread tastes.
Basically, it made it hard to look at our main universe Peter Parker the same way ever again. It was weird. It came out of nowhere. It was massively out of character. And yet, to this day, every time a writer tries to undo it, they are stopped. and so Peter remains single forever. Despite how little it works for his character, and how many bullshit excuses they make for him and MJ not being together anymore. Like, Paul? Fucking Paul? Have you seen this guy? This is Paul. Okay, so in the most recent issue of How Do We Clumsily Make It So Peter Can't Be Happy, Mary Jane and some random guy get trapped outside our main reality for literal years for her, but not for Peter. He's not there for long at all. And now, once she returns, she has a bunch of kids with this guy. By the time this comes out, this will undoubtedly be undone, and I believe it has been undone, which, I mean, sure, but it also just makes this story even more stupid and confusing. Like, how many times do we have to do this? Meanwhile, remember how Marvel Editorial is desperate for a young, single Spider-Man with a fresh face and his whole life ahead of him to be around? How do we have a Spider-Man whose story isn't weighed down by having naturally progressed over decades to the point where he had a wife and the potential of a family? Where he grew up? To the point where one of the best Spider-Man stories come out of the last decade was an alternate universe where him and Mary Jane were allowed to have kids and start a family, and yet they still insist on making the Peter Parker stories as convoluted as possible, just so his character can never progress. Well, Marvel Editorial. Have you guys heard of a guy called Miles Morales? Miles Morales' story began in the Ultimate Universe after the death of Peter Parker, after which he took up the mantle of Spider-Man, confronting his uncle, the Prowler, despite the closeness of the two, and becoming an incredible superhero in his own right, joining the Ultimates, which is the Ultimate Universe's version of the Avengers, dealing with love and loss, and most importantly, being a fresh new take on Spider-Man, and a great character in his own right, a mixed black Puerto Rican kid who was unfortunately written by a white man, so thanks to the Bendis of it all, that wasn't explored as well as it could have been initially, but I loved the original run anyway. I guess partly because I didn't realize that Miles' dad was named after the head of the Confederacy for some reason. Like, why? Just why? Anyway, Miles was a great addition to the Ultimate Universe and proved something of a surprise hit. By the time Marvel was thinking of dropping the Ultimate line, after over a decade of comics had left it with as much continuity baggage as the mainline Marvel Universe, which was always its selling point, Ultimate Spider-Man was the only moneymaker left in the line, and it remained pretty popular, despite the story running out of steam a little bit towards the end. Like, there were piss babies, of course, like there always have been, people who either don't realise that legacy heroes have been a thing as long as superhero comics have been a thing, or people that just wanted an excuse to get angry at the idea that Black and Latino people can be heroes. Honestly, even the ones that thought they were arguing for the former were probably more like the latter than they realised. Miles Morales entered the main Marvel Universe after Jonathan Hickman's Secret Wars reset the Marvel Universe. That's a top 10 story, by the way, you should read it. Since then, he and Peter have coexisted, shared stories, had their own adventures, and honestly, everything that editorial insisted had to happen for Peter, Miles is doing better. Like, having Peter be distant and weird from MJ by some weird forced plot points isn't fun to read. You can hear the interference, you can hear it not being a natural story. You know where his character's been leading, you can feel the progression not happening, but Miles having a relationship with a descendant of the Vulture? That's fun to bloody read. Miles is great. He's young, he has a fresh take on the idea of what Spider-Man should be. He has a brilliant supporting cast from Ganke to Judge, and what's more, he's making a hell of an impact. As someone who grew up on Ultimate Spider-Man, I was so excited for Into the Spider-Verse coming out. I went to one of the limited showings for it in Liverpool at the time, and it was easily the best Spider-Man movie I had ever seen, if not one of my favourite movies of all time. Yes, I'm easily pleased. Citizen Kane's probably better. I've never seen it. Don't come at me, film bros, but I like Spider-Man. I'm sorry, I like Spider-Man. Miles was done so well, and I was so excited for a new generation of kids, especially Black and Latino kids, to have a new Spider-Man to be excited for, to see themselves in, to use to understand their struggles as a teenager. A young adult, a person just trying to do good in a society that tries its best to tear you down. Across the Spider-Verse just came out, and it's doing great. Everyone is super hyped. Miles is incredible. Hobie is incredible. And I'm seeing little black kids with Miles Morales backpacks everywhere at home, and I love it. Like, you can see the impact he's having, like, visually. When was the last time we saw kids this genuinely excited about Spider-Man or any new superhero figure? Marvel has the chance to capture a whole new generation's hearts with Miles Morales. He's already a beloved character, even with a fraction of the push that Peter still gets. And this fresh excitement should be reflected in the comics. Not just because it would be good for Marvel's bottom line to get a younger, more diverse audience invested in their comic books, but because it would make the Spider-Man stories Miles and Peter are like much easier to write if they just let Miles take the spotlight and let Peter grow up. Let his character arc naturally follow to where it was before it's cut mercilessly short. Listen, I love Peter Parker, but his story moved on. It's not over. It's just different, and people should let it be different. His character changed, it developed, as characters should. Let him be a husband, let him be a dad if he wants to. Let Miles, he's not real. Let him be a husband, let him be a dad. Let Miles be the main Spider-Man for a bit. Let our boy Peter be happy. Let him take the mentor role, and let Miles take the lead. Culturally, I think he might be starting to make an impact just as big as Peter, if not bigger. And if Marvel was smart, they would be riding that wave, instead of insisting on trying to fit Peter into a Miles-shaped box and letting Miles just exist on the down low. Miles Morales could save the Spider-Man franchise. He is everything Peter long ago grew out of, and he does it better in some ways. Like, let these characters evolve. Do you know how important it is to have Miles Morales front and center in these Spider-Man movies? To be a mainstay in one of the biggest franchises on our screens right now? It's a huge deal. I'm just saying, don't waste this chance. Let Miles save the Spider-Man franchise. Because even with all the vocal haters, the people insisting that a mixed black Latino kid can't be Spider-Man, the editorial fuckery, the pushing of Miles to the back burner in favor of yet again recasting Peter Parker for the MCU movies and Tom Holland, he's already giving life to a franchise that has been struggling to find its legs since One More Day. Let him save it. That's his thing. It's what he does. Let him save the day like he was saving people in the comic books. So you might have guessed from this video, but I saw Across the Spider-Verse, and it was incredible. Hobie Brown, and that's all I have to say as a punk, a British anarchist. Yes, Hobie. Everything Hobie. Hobie all the time, please. 100 more Hobies. Hobies. But, in short, incredible. Amazing follow-up. Obviously, it's only half a movie, really, but I loved it. Everything from Miles' progression, how he's grown up, to Gwen's character arc, to... Oh, there's so many things to talk about. Maybe I should just make a review. I don't make reviews. Maybe I'm interested in whether it's propaganda or not. I don't think it is. In short, fucking great. 2099. Why is he a vampire? Is he a vampire in the comics? I never read Spider-Man 2099. Happy to see Sun Spider. And Spider-Punk. That's most of my thoughts are just Hobie. It's a metaphor for capitalism. That's my review, I guess. And as always, thanks for watching, webheads. Hey everyone, new country, who dis? Thank you so much for everyone who helped me move away from Turf Island and into the extremely stable environment of continental Europe, where I'm not worried about Maloney, the AFD, Le Pen, Hungary, Poland, or all the Nazi graffiti just out on the street at all. Like, Jesus Christ as well. In all seriousness, it's good to be away from the heartland of the transphobic counter-revolution for a bit, even though, like, I miss my family and friends, but I do feel safer here. Just let you know, I feel okay. I'm good, I'm safe, and I'm so grateful for you to allowing me to make this big move. That wasn't the right order of those words, but I'm going to continue anyway. Now, I still don't have a job over here yet, so if you want to help me out, you can always donate to me on Ko-fi, or better yet, sign up to my Patreon, where, if you sign up, you can get early access to all of my videos, usually a few days early, occasionally not, but usually, and when I'm not, I fucked up, so you can tell me on the Patreon, say, Dr. Catherine, Bridget Empire, you fucked up, and I'll be like, yes. How can I make it up to you, and I'll buy you a beer or something? I don't know if that's how that works. Is that how Patreon works? Probably not. Anyway, as well as getting early access to these videos, you can get exclusive content, such as my full videos, of my interviews with Princess Weeks and Rosenkreutz, and another one to join those soon, probably, if all my cards get in ducks get in the row, that's the phrase. English is a weird language. In addition, if you join my Patreon, I'll read your name out at the end of each video, just like these wonderful people who you should all model yourselves after. Artie Wolf, Hayden Gaylor, Greg Noble, no kings, only fools. H, Deanna McMillan, Caroline Regalado, Jenny Linsky, Alexandra Lilly, Jay Peterson, Anne Becerra, Howard Lott, Laura Van Loon, Scarjan, and Joey Cobalt. I love you all. Thank you for helping me keep the lights on. Thank you so much for all of your help. It means the world to me. And, yeah. See you next time. Fly. Go, web, go. Up, up, and away, web.